A single mark in a ledger could make or break a medieval merchant's fortune. This was the power of 26 coded symbols, a secret language that governed global trade for centuries. These were not random doodles, but a sophisticated system built on trust and credit, enabling business across continents long before modern technology. By the end of this story, you will understand how these ancient symbols secretly built the foundation of our modern financial world. We will uncover why a simple anchor meant absolute security and how a crescent moon could predict market chaos. What do you believe is the most important ingredient for trust in business today? A chaotic marketplace in 14th century Europe thrived on a dangerous paradox. Spices, silks, and precious metals flowed from across the known world, yet the merchants trading them operated in a landscape of profound uncertainty. Written contracts were scarce, enforceable law was often local, and a handshake had to bridge continents. Trust was the most valuable commodity, and it was terrifyingly fragile. Into this volatile environment stepped merchant guilds, powerful alliances that sought to bring order to the chaos. Their greatest challenge was long-distance trade, where a deal struck in Venice might not be settled for months until a ship reached Alexandria. How could they record these complex transactions without exposing their profit margins to prying eyes, or revealing their debts to rivals and royal tax collectors? The solution was a language of pure function, born from necessity. 26 coded symbols offered a way to inscribe agreements in a ledger that was both a record and a shield. A single mark could denote a price, a debt, or a silent partner, all while keeping the true meaning hidden from anyone outside the circle of trust. Historians like Janet Abu-Lughod identify this as the heart of a commercial revolution, a transformation in how business was done that laid the groundwork for the Renaissance itself. This was a world of fragmented currencies where every city might mint its own coin, and of immense risk where a single shipwreck could ruin a family for generations. In such an environment, a secret code was not a mere convenience. It was a tool for survival, the difference between flourishing and financial collapse. It is a need that echoes powerfully today. The complex encryption safeguarding your online bank account serves the same fundamental purpose as those ink strokes on parchment, to create security in a realm of inherent risk. This foundational need for secrecy and efficiency would force these simple symbols to evolve into something far more intricate and powerful. A Genos merchant once faced a dilemma. He needed to send a large shipment of wool to a business partner in a distant city, but he had no guarantee the payment would ever arrive. His solution was not a complex contract but a single, deliberate mark in his ledger. He drew an anchor. This was not a doodle. It was a binding financial instrument. The anchor, often sketched with a distinct crossbar, was the universal symbol for a security deposit. It told anyone within the trusted circle that specific goods, the wool in this case, were physically held in a secure warehouse as collateral. They would not be released until the full payment was confirmed. This simple drawing transformed uncertainty into absolute security. According to surviving trade ledgers from Venice, this symbol was the bedrock of loans and partnerships. Its presence next to a sum of money meant the deal was backed by tangible assets, dramatically reducing the risk of fraud or default. In one ledger from the year 1350, an anchor drawn beside an entry for 100 gold florins meant that bales of silk were held in escrow. This system functioned exactly like a modern escrow account, where a neutral third party holds assets until all conditions are met. The anchor was more than a code. It was a visual promise, a signal of stability in a turbulent commercial world. It asked a silent question of every merchant who saw it. How might your own agreements be strengthened by such an unmistakable symbol of commitment? This pursuit of reliability through symbolism did not stop with secured goods. It evolved to tackle an even greater challenge, the unpredictable flow of credit across vast distances. While the anchor promised security, the crescent moon embraced uncertainty. In the bustling ports of Constantinople, a merchant did not just watch the tides. He watched the moon, or at least its symbol in his ledger. A single crescent drawn beside an entry for pepper or silk was a powerful warning. It meant the price was not fixed. It was subject to the volatile rhythms of the market, fluctuating with seasonal demand, currency instability, or the simple fact that a rival's ship might arrive tomorrow and flood the market. This symbol was the medieval equivalent of a floating exchange rate. Historical records from Mediterranean trade hubs reveal how vital this was. Coins like the Byzantine solidus or the Florentine florin did not have a single, universal value. Their worth could shift with political tides and the arrival of precious metals. The crescent moon was a preemptive peace treaty, a way to tell a business partner that the final number was open for renegotiation, preventing costly disputes before they could even begin. One ledger from the 13th century shows the crescent meticulously inked next to entries for cinnamon and nutmeg. This was not an arbitrary mark. It signaled that the final cost of these spices was entirely dependent on the safe arrival of a specific caravan. If the goods arrived late, the price would be higher to account for the greater risk and storage costs. If they arrived early, a discount might be applied. This simple symbol provided a crucial flexibility, allowing traders to thrive in economies where certainty was a fantasy. It functioned much like the dynamic pricing algorithms used by modern airlines and online retailers, which constantly adjust costs based on real-time demand. The crescent moon accepted the inevitable change in all things, a philosophy that seamlessly leads us to a symbol that dealt with the most finite resource of all, time itself. A merchant in the bustling cloth halls of Bruges faced a shipment of English wool that had just arrived. He did not immediately record a sale. Instead, he drew a key in his ledger. This symbol did not represent a physical object. It unlocked a conditional agreement, a deal that was only final once the wool passed a stringent quality inspection. The entire transaction remained locked in a state of suspension until that specific condition was met. The key was the master symbol for clauses and contingencies, the fine print of the medieval merchant world. It governed sales that were dependent on delivery deadlines, the arrival of a specific ship, or the verification that goods were not damaged by seawater. As the historian Fern and Braudel observed, this symbol was the engine of long-distance trade, a system built to accommodate the inevitable delays and uncertainties of travel across continents and seas. It codified patience and precision into the very heart of commerce. In practice, a key drawn next to an entry for Flemish cloth meant the final payment was not due until the goods were unloaded in Constantinople and assessed for any tears or fading. This was not a sign of distrust, but a framework for building greater trust. It forced all parties to agree on the rules of the game before the first coin ever changed hands. This system of conditional terms dramatically reduced financial risks and fostered a culture of accountability, functioning much like a modern real estate contract where the sale is contingent on a home inspection or securing a mortgage. Can you think of an agreement in your own life that would be safer with such a clearly defined condition? The key secured the terms of a deal, but it did not manage the physical movement of the goods themselves. a challenge that required a symbol of pure, dynamic motion. A merchant in Alexandria did not need a map to trace the journey of his silk. He needed only a single, elegant, wavy line drawn in his ledger. This symbol, the river wave, captured the entire life cycle of goods in motion along the world's liquid highways. It was the medieval code for transport and logistics, a silent announcement that precious cargo was en route, its fate entrusted to rivers and seas. In an era without instant communication, this symbol was a critical tool for managing expectations and calculating risk. Ledgers from the powerful Hanseatic League show the wave meticulously paired with dates, creating a primitive but effective tracking system. A wave sketched beside an entry for a barrel of wine told a London merchant that it was currently sailing from Bordeaux, its value already adjusting for the perils of the voyage. The threat of piracy, sudden storms, or simple delays was baked into the final price the moment that wavy line was inscribed. This symbol did more than just indicate location. It represented a state of limbo where assets were active but inaccessible, their safe arrival the pivotal moment that would transform a risky venture into solid profit. The entire supply chain, from a river barge on the Rhine to a cog crossing the Mediterranean, was distilled into that one fluid mark. It functioned with the same core purpose as a modern package tracking number, offering a sliver of predictability in an unpredictable process. How do you track the important shipments in your own life, and could a single, clear symbol bring more peace of mind? This constant flow of goods required a destination, a place of safety where items could wait, and for that, merchants turned to a symbol of pure stability. A merchant in Cologne did not need a sprawling list to know his wealth. He needed only a single, stout barrel sketched beside an entry for grain. This humble symbol transformed the chaos of a warehouse into a clear statement of value. The barrel was the universal mark for bulk storage, a sign that goods like salt, wine, or wool were held securely in reserve, removed from the immediate churn of the market. Its presence in a ledger answered a critical question at a glance. What do we have in reserve, and where is it? Medieval account books from the Hanseatic trading posts reveal how this simple icon streamlined complex inventories. A single barrel mark next to a quantity of pepper communicated that the spice was not on a cart or a ship, but resting in a certified storage facility, its quality assured and its quantity known. This allowed merchants to assess their total assets and plan for future demand with remarkable speed, saving countless hours and reducing the errors inherent in long, handwritten lists. This system allowed for sophisticated speculation. A merchant seeing ample barrels of grain in his ledger might decide to hold his stock, anticipating that a poor harvest or a local conflict would drive prices higher in the coming months. It functioned with the same core logic as a modern just-in-time inventory system, where a simple barcode scan reveals stock levels and triggers replenishment, ensuring efficiency across a global supply chain. The barrel was a symbol of potential, of wealth waiting for its moment. How much time could a single, clear icon save in managing your own household supplies? This mastery over physical reserves was only one side of the ledger, for the true lifeblood of commerce was not just goods, but the promises that moved them, a flow managed by a symbol of pure trust. Two merchants stood nose to nose, their voices rising over a barrel of spoiled wine. The seller demanded his payment. The buyer refused, pointing to the vinegar-scented liquid. This was a moment of potential chaos, the kind that could shatter a business relationship forever. Yet the resolution did not begin with a shouting match or a drawn knife. It began with a single, deliberate mark in the ledger, the crossed swords. This symbol was a formal declaration of war, but a war fought with ink and arbitration, not steel. It flagged the transaction as contested, freezing all payment and obligating both parties to seek mediation from their guild. Records from the Great Champagne Fairs show how this simple symbol prevented countless violent feuds. When a shipment of Flemish cloth arrived moth-eaten, the buyer would inscribe the crossed swords beside the entry. This action did not mean the deal was cancelled. It meant the dispute was now official, and a neutral third party would examine the goods and render a binding judgment. The swords forced a cooling-off period, transforming raw anger into a structured process. This system promoted fairness and drastically reduced the need for costly and unpredictable court battles. It functioned with the same core purpose as a modern dispute resolution clause in a service contract, channeling conflict toward a predetermined, peaceful outcome. How might clearly marking a disagreement in your own records, whether with a partner or a colleague, prevent a small misunderstanding from escalating into a full-blown argument? The crossed swords managed conflict, but another symbol worked to prevent it altogether by guaranteeing the very quality of the goods being traded. A London merchant inscribing a tiny crown beside a shipment of wool was not just making a decorative flourish. He was invoking the absolute power of the throne. This symbol, the crown, was the ultimate mark of royal endorsement, a sign that these goods moved under the exclusive license and protection of the king himself. For commodities like high-quality English wool, a crown drawn in the ledger meant the merchant held a monopoly, a legally enforced exclusive right to trade that specific product, often with markets like Flanders. This was not merely a privilege, it was a complete control over supply. As the historian Michael Poston documented, this symbol frequently appeared in the accounts of regulated markets, where the crown's approval could single-handedly dictate prices and determine who was allowed to participate in the trade. In practice, a crown sketched beside an entry for pepper or silk signaled that the entire shipment was imported under a royal charter. This granted the merchant a legal shield against competitors and often justified a significant price increase, a premium paid for guaranteed authenticity and royal backing. This system was an early, powerful form of intellectual property and government certification. It functioned with the same foundational purpose as a modern trademark or an organic certification seal on food, using a recognized symbol to instantly communicate quality, origin, and legal standing to the buyer. The crown centralized authority in a symbol, but this authority was not always held by a single person. The most ambitious trade ventures required a different kind of power, one built on shared risk and collective ambition, a cooperation represented by a symbol of intertwined fates. Two merchants in Florence did not need a lengthy legal contract to seal their partnership. They drew two interlocked rings in the ledger beside an entry for a silk caravan. This single, elegant symbol bound their fortunes together across the treacherous deserts and unpredictable seas that lay between them. The interlocked rings were the universal code for a joint venture, a formal declaration that risks and profits would be shared. Surviving ledgers from Venice and Genoa show these rings often contain tiny initials or numbers, precisely marking each partner's financial stake in the enterprise. It was a system of shared ownership that functioned with the clarity of a modern shareholder agreement. For example, rings drawn around a sum of 1,000 gold florins indicated a collaborative loan to fund a ship's voyage, with every investor's return meticulously calculated based on their contribution and waiting for the vessel's safe return to port. This practice of capital pooling was revolutionary. It allowed smaller merchants who could never afford to finance a trading expedition alone to band together and compete with the established, wealthy elites. By distributing the immense risk of a shipwreck or bandit attack among many, the rings made ambitious, long-distance trade possible for a much wider segment of the commercial class. They wove individual threads of capital into a stronger rope, capable of pulling vast wealth across continents. How do you approach collaboration in your own ventures, and could a clear, symbolic agreement from the start strengthen the trust among all partners? This powerful unity, however, always operated against the relentless pressure of time, a force controlled by the next symbol in the merchant's secret arsenal. The hourglass in a merchant's ledger did not just measure time, it commanded it. When a Venetian trader drew this symbol next to a debt, he was not making a casual note. He was setting a financial clock in motion, its sands counting down to the moment a payment was due. This was the code for time-sensitive agreements, a system that brought the abstract force of time under the control of commerce. In an era without universal calendars or instant reminders, the hourglass created a shared, visible deadline that everyone understood. Records from the legendary Medici Bank show how vital this was for managing cash flow. An hourglass sketched beside a loan of 50 gold florins to a knight for a new suit of armor meant the full amount was due before the grains of sand ran out, often within 30 or 60 days. After that point, interest would begin to accrue, or goods could be seized as collateral. This symbol transformed a vague promise into a concrete obligation, dramatically reducing defaults by making the consequences of delay perfectly clear to both parties. It functioned with the same foundational logic as a modern invoice with net 30 terms or a subscription that auto-renews on a specific date, using the pressure of a deadline to ensure punctuality. Can you see how a clearly marked deadline in your own financial dealings might encourage more timely payments from others? The hourglass masterfully quantified time for monetary debts, but commerce often flowed through a different, more ancient channel, one that required a symbol not of counted minutes, but of direct, tangible exchange. A merchant in Cairo did not lament his lack of gold coins. He simply drew a balanced set of scales beside an entry for 10 amphorae of olive oil. This symbol did not represent a price, but a principle, the ancient art of direct barter. In a world where reliable currency was often scarce, the scales guaranteed a trade of equivalent value, allowing commerce to flow even when coins did not. The scales were the ledger's way of recording a pure exchange, like a shipment of fine textiles swapped directly for that olive oil, with neither party ever touching money. Historians like Peter Spufford note this symbol was the engine of trade across vast regions like the Silk Road, where dozens of different currencies might circulate, but the fundamental need for goods remained constant. In practice, a merchant would inscribe the scales to show that a bale of silk was considered equal in value to a specific weight of raw silver, with both the quality of the silk and the purity of the metal factored into the final, balanced equation. This system of direct equivalence transcended language and political borders, enabling deals between merchants who might not share a common coin, but understood the universal language of fair weight and measure. It functioned much like a modern online barter platform, where services are traded directly without cash changing hands, proving that value is not always measured in currency. How might thinking in terms of direct value exchange, rather than just price, open up new possibilities in your own resource management? This focus on balanced value, however, often concealed information too sensitive for plain sight, a need that demanded a symbol for secrets themselves. A Genos merchant's greatest asset was not his gold but a secret. He recorded a large shipment of alum, a vital mineral for dyeing cloth, but beside the entry he drew not a price but a quill and scroll. This symbol was a silent alarm, a warning that the true terms of this deal were hidden from view. It told any trusted clerk that the numbers written here were a decoy, and the real agreement, perhaps detailing a hidden fee paid to a customs official or a private understanding with a political rival, was stored elsewhere, often in cipher or a separate, locked ledger. Archives from the Papal States reveal loans to powerful nobles marked with this very symbol, where the true collateral was not land or goods, but a promise of political favor, a term too dangerous to ever write in plain text. The quill and scroll created a layer of plausible deniability, protecting merchants from both prying eyes and the wrath of kings. This practice was the direct ancestor of our modern non-disclosure agreements and encrypted business communications, all serving the same timeless need to shield sensitive information from competitors and authorities. How do you safeguard the confidential details in your own important agreements? This mastery over secrets was vital, but it could not eliminate the fundamental risks of the sea, a threat so great it required its own symbol of shared protection. The shield drawn beside a shipment of timber in a Lisbon ledger was a merchant's silent prayer against the storm. It did not represent a soldier or a castle wall, but something far more powerful in the world of commerce, a financial safety net. This symbol stood for insurance, a formal agreement that the goods were protected against the ever-present dangers of piracy, shipwreck, or simple bad weather. Merchants would regularly contribute to a mutual fund managed by their guild, a collective pot of money designed to cover any member's catastrophic loss. Historians like Giovanni Arrighi point to this practice as a cornerstone of maritime trade, especially along the perilous Baltic Sea routes where a single storm could erase a fortune. When a ship carrying that insured timber sank, the owner would not face utter ruin. Instead, he would be compensated from the guild's shared funds, allowing him to settle his own debts and perhaps even finance his next voyage. This system of risk pooling was an early form of underwriting, and it fundamentally changed the psychology of trade. It transformed a paralyzing fear of total loss into a calculated, manageable business expense. The shield emboldened merchants, giving them the confidence to send their ships into deeper waters and pursue more ambitious deals, knowing their entire livelihood was not riding on the waves of a single vessel. It functioned with the same core principle as your modern car or home insurance, a monthly premium paid for peace of mind against life's unpredictable disasters. How does having a safety net, however small, influence the risks you are willing to take in your own endeavors? This protective symbol managed the risks of nature and bandits, but there was one unavoidable threat it could not deflect: the unwavering demand of the royal treasury. Every merchant knew the royal tax collector's visit was not a request but a demand. In a Parisian counting house, a trader would finish recording a sale of fine wine and then, with a steady hand, sketch a small coin pouch beside the entry. This was not a record of profit but of duty. The pouch symbol marked every transaction burdened with a tax, a tariff, or a tribute owed to the local lord, the city council, or the crown itself. In an era of bewildering fiscal rules, where a barrel of wine might be subject to a dozen different levies between the vineyard and the tavern, this simple icon brought order to obligation. Surviving French fiscal records show how the pouch transformed a private ledger into an official tax document, its presence proving the merchant was aware of his liabilities and intended to pay. For example, a pouch drawn next to a sale of Flemish cloth meant a specific portion of the revenue was reserved for the Royal Customs House, a sum that had to be meticulously accounted for to avoid severe fines or the seizure of goods. This system functioned as the medieval equivalent of an itemized sales tax line on a modern invoice, clearly separating the net price from the amount due to the authorities. It forced merchants to be their own accountants, embedding compliance directly into their daily record-keeping. How do you separate your own financial obligations from your disposable income to maintain a clear picture of what you truly own? This careful tracking of what was owed to others paved the way for a symbol that guaranteed the inherent value of the goods themselves. A Damascus merchant did not need to open every sack to prove his spices were the finest. He simply drew a star. This single, elegant mark was a silent shout of quality, a guarantee that the saffron or pepper within had passed the most rigorous inspections by his guild. It signified purity, specific origin, and exceptional grade, allowing these goods to command a price far above the common market rate. Historical records from the spice trade show this symbol was paramount for building trust across vast distances. A buyer in London, seeing a star meticulously inked beside an entry for cinnamon, could place an order with absolute confidence, knowing the product would meet his exact expectations upon arrival months later. This was the birth of branding. For instance, a star next to saffron was a specific claim that it hailed from the fields of Kashmir, a region renowned for producing the most potent and valuable strands. This certification created immense loyalty, turning an anonymous commodity into a sought-after name. The star system functioned exactly like a modern organic or fair trade label, using a universally recognized symbol to instantly communicate value and integrity, saving the buyer from uncertainty and rewarding the seller for his high standards. How much does a trusted quality seal on a product influence what you choose to buy? This pursuit of excellence, however, existed in a world where not every debt could be collected, a harsh reality managed by a symbol of graceful surrender. A broken chain drawn in a Valencia ledger did not signify a failure, but a profound act of calculated mercy. When a merchant's trusted partner was ruined by a poor harvest or a shipwreck, demanding repayment could destroy a relationship built over decades. The broken chain was the formal symbol for debt forgiveness, a deliberate cancellation of what was owed. This was not an act of charity, but a strategic investment in the future stability of a commercial network. Records from Jewish merchant communities who pioneered extensive trade routes across the Mediterranean show this symbol was used to preserve essential social and business bonds that were more valuable than any single transaction. For instance, a broken chain sketched beside a loan of 100 silver coins to a vintner whose vineyards had frozen meant the debt was wiped clean. This allowed the vintner to recover and continue his business, ensuring he would remain a loyal partner for years to come. The merchant accepted a short-term loss to guarantee a long-term gain, a practice that echoes modern corporate debt restructuring or a bank writing off a loan for a valued client in crisis. How might a willingness to forgive a debt within reason ultimately build a stronger and more resilient partnership? This release from obligation dealt with the past, but commerce always looked forward, requiring a symbol to secure a merchant's legacy for the generation to come. A merchant in Augsburg knew his greatest duty was not to his own ledger, but to the generations that would follow. In the final pages of his account book, he did not write a long will. He drew his family crest beside the entry for his most valuable warehouse. This single heraldic mark was a command from beyond the grave, a legal and financial instrument that ensured his life's work would pass intact to his chosen heirs. The crest was the master symbol for inheritance and succession, a silent, powerful declaration that certain assets were irrevocably earmarked for specific descendants. Surviving ledgers from powerful German trading dynasties like the Fuggers and the Welsers show how this simple drawing prevented brutal family feuds. A crest inscribed next to a sum of money or a shipment of copper wire clearly assigned that wealth to a second son or a daughter's dowry, leaving no room for argument or interpretation upon the patriarch's death. For example, a specific warehouse filled with Flemish cloth marked with the family eagle meant it was reserved exclusively for the eldest son, securing the core of the business for the continuation of the lineage. This was more than a wish, it was a binding plan etched into the very records that defined the family's wealth. This system of symbolic succession functioned with the same foundational purpose as a modern trust fund or a detailed estate plan, using a clear, visual marker to bypass confusion and guarantee a smooth transition of power and property. It asked every merchant to look beyond his own lifetime. How do you plan for succession in your own ventures, ensuring that what you build endures? This meticulous planning for a family's future was often balanced by a symbol that looked beyond bloodlines toward the spiritual and communal obligations of wealth. The merchant's family crest secured his worldly legacy, but another symbol addressed a debt of the soul. In the quiet of a York counting house, a trader would close his ledger for the day, but not before sketching a single, open hand beside a sum of money. This was not an expense but an investment in the hereafter. The open hand was the clear, deliberate mark for charitable donations and alms, a formal record of piety woven directly into the fabric of commerce. It showed that a portion of the week's profit from wool or wine was earmarked for the local monastery, a hospital, or direct distribution to the city's poor. Surviving ledgers from Catholic merchant families show this symbol was as routine as any other entry, a disciplined practice of giving that fulfilled religious duty and reinforced social bonds. For instance, an open hand drawn next to an entry for 20 silver pennies meant that exact amount was reserved as a tithe to the church, a spiritual obligation accounted for with the same precision as a payment to a supplier. This was not merely charity, it was corporate social responsibility in its medieval form. A merchant known for his generous open-hand entries could earn the lasting favor of the church and the community, greasing the wheels of business with goodwill and building a reputation for integrity that was itself a valuable asset. This practice resonates deeply with modern businesses that publicly commit a percentage of profits to social causes, understanding that ethical standing and financial success are often intertwined. How does a conscious practice of generosity, whether in time or resources, shape the legacy of your own endeavors? This outward flow of wealth, carefully recorded, highlights a fascinating truth that medieval merchants were already masters at accounting for future promises, a skill perfectly captured by the next symbol in their arsenal. An arrow pointing forward in an Antwerp ledger was a merchant's leap of faith into the future itself. This symbol did not record a past transaction or a present inventory. It locked in a price for a harvest of grain or a clip of wool that did not yet exist, sold for delivery months down the line. This was the power of a futures contract, an agreement that allowed merchants to speculate on coming plenty or scarcity, and more importantly, to secure their own survival against the wild swings of the market. Historical Flemish ledgers show the arrow employed with remarkable sophistication, especially in the wool trade. An arrow sketched decisively next to an entry for fleeces was a binding promise. It meant the entire clip from a specific flock, once the sheep were shorn in the spring, was already committed to a buyer in Bruges at a fixed price. For the shepherd, this guaranteed his income regardless of a sudden market glut. For the cloth merchant, it ensured a steady supply of raw material, even if a poor season made wool scarce and expensive for his competitors. This early form of derivatives trading transformed uncertainty into a manageable variable. It was a financial hedge, a way to share and mitigate risk that allowed commerce to plan for seasons and years, not just days. This practice echoes in the modern commodities markets where farmers today still sell futures on their wheat or soybeans, locking in a price long before the first seed even touches the soil. How might locking in a future price for a major expense bring more stability to your own financial planning? The arrow projected commerce confidently into the future, But this system of agreements required a mechanism to enforce it, a consequence for broken promises represented by a far sterner symbol. That frowning mask in the Milanese ledger was a silent judge, its grim expression a final verdict on a broken promise. It did not record a transaction, but a transgression, a formal penalty for a partner who failed to deliver goods on time or whose quality fell short of the agreed standard. This symbol transformed the ledger from a simple financial record into a tool of enforcement and accountability. Guild statutes from cities like Florence and Genoa explicitly outlined the fines for such breaches, and the mask was the visual shorthand for that legal reality. For example, a mask drawn firmly beside an entry for a late shipment of Lombard iron meant the supplier now owed a specific sum, perhaps 10% of the contract's value, directly to the buyer. This was not an arbitrary punishment, but a calculated disincentive, a way to make the cost of unreliability painfully clear. The system functioned with the same foundational logic as a modern late fee on an invoice or a financial penalty for missing a project deadline, using monetary consequence to uphold the integrity of an agreement. How do you ensure accountability in your own collaborative projects? This focus on penalties for failure created a necessary balance in the system, but commerce also thrived on incentives, a more positive form of persuasion perfectly captured by the very next symbol. A merchant in Barcelona did not haggle over every coin. Instead, he drew a single, deliberate line through the symbol for a silver piece in his ledger. This was the mark of the cut coin, and it was a powerful tool for building loyalty, not a sign of loss. The symbol did not record a payment, but a calculated reduction, a discount offered for bulk purchases, a long-standing partnership, or a reward for prompt payment. Surviving Catalan ledgers show this symbol was central to a sophisticated pricing strategy. A cut coin sketched beside an entry for 100 pounds of pepper signaled that the buyer, a trusted partner from Marseille, received a 10% reduction from the standard price. This practice allowed the merchant to maintain a clear base price in his records while flexibly rewarding his best clients, ensuring they would return voyage after voyage. It was a visual record of goodwill, a way to track the true cost of relationships over time. This system functioned with the same core logic as a modern wholesale discount for a bulk order or a special offer for a loyal subscriber, using a clear, simple mark to manage flexible pricing without ever confusing the core accounts. How do you acknowledge and reward the loyalty in your own professional or personal networks? This clever adjustment of value for trusted partners was just one facet of a merchant's toolkit, a practice that smoothly transitions to the complex world of international exchange, where value itself was never a fixed concept. A Hamburg merchant's most ambitious deal was not recorded with a simple description, but with a single, stark drawing of a fortified tower. This symbol did not represent a building, but a barrier, the complex wall of rules and risks that defined every cross-border transaction. When a merchant sketched a tower beside an entry for sable furs, he was signaling that this trade reached beyond the familiar territories of the Hanseatic League into foreign lands like Novgorod or the Levant. These deals operated under a different set of rules, involving volatile foreign currencies, unpredictable customs officials, and legal systems that offered no protection to an outsider. Surviving Hanseatic ledgers show the tower was essential for accounting clarity, instantly categorizing any entry that required special handling. For example, a tower drawn next to a shipment of wax told the bookkeeper that its final value was not just in silver marks, but also in the cost of tariffs paid at a Russian border post and the expense of hiring a local translator. This symbol organized the chaos of global trade into a manageable category, functioning much like a modern international business division within a company, where cross-border sales are managed by specialists who navigate tariffs and exchange rates. How do you separate and manage the international elements in your own ventures? The tower masterfully defined the spatial boundaries of trade, but commerce was also governed by an inescapable temporal rhythm, the turning of the seasons that dictated the very flow of goods, a cycle captured by the next symbol in the merchant's code. A wreath of holly sketched in a cologne ledger was far more than a festive decoration. It was a precise financial forecast. This symbol, the wreath, governed the rhythm of seasonal trade, marking goods destined for the great religious festivals like Christmas or Easter, when demand for specific items would explode. For a merchant, recognizing these cycles was the key to profit. He would use the wreath to earmark inventory, ensuring his warehouses were stocked with the right goods long before the crowds descended on the market square. Records from medieval fairs across Europe show how this simple icon transformed chaotic holiday rushes into calculated business. A wreath drawn decisively next to an entry for beeswax candles signaled they were not ordinary stock, but premium goods reserved for the Easter market, where they would command a significantly higher price for church services and home altars. This was the medieval equivalent of a modern retailer planning their Christmas toy aisle in July, using historical sales data to anticipate and capitalize on predictable surges in consumer desire. The wreath embedded the cultural and religious calendar directly into the language of commerce, forcing merchants to think in cycles of boom and calm. It asked a timeless question of every trader who used it. How do the predictable rhythms of the year shape your own business or personal financial strategies? This mastery of the seasonal cycle was a powerful form of planning, but it required a flexible tool to handle the immediate, personal financial needs that arose between those annual booms, a need met by the next symbol in the code. A Florentine banker did not need a vault to secure his loan, only a simple padlock sketched in his ledger. This symbol transformed a piece of property or a string of pearls into liquid capital, a loan backed not by a vague promise but by tangible collateral. The padlock was the universal mark for pawn transactions, a system that provided merchants and nobles alike with quick access to funds while giving the lender absolute security. As the historian Raymond de Roover documented in his studies of medieval banking, this symbol was a binding legal notation. Its presence next to a loan of 100 gold florins meant a specific asset, like a noble family's silver plate or a deed to a vineyard, was physically held in escrow. The borrower retained ownership, but the right of possession was locked away until the final payment unlocked the agreement. This practice was the engine of personal liquidity in an era before credit cards. A merchant facing a sudden opportunity to buy a shipment of spices could not wait for his own goods to sell. By pawning his wife's necklace, he could access the capital immediately, with the padlock in the ledger ensuring the necklace would be returned the moment he repaid the debt. This system functioned with the same foundational principle as a modern pawnshop or a secured car loan, where the asset itself guarantees the lender will not lose their investment. Can you see how using an asset as collateral might open up financial options while managing risk? This focus on secured agreements through physical assets was a cornerstone of trust, but another layer of security existed not in objects, but in identity itself, a belonging represented by the next symbol in the merchant's code. A merchant in Ghent chose his next shipment of iron tools not by inspecting each piece, but by a single mark in his supplier's ledger, the hammer and anvil. This symbol was far more than a picture of a craft. It was a seal of collective integrity, a guarantee that every item came from a guild workshop where standards of quality and fair labor were rigorously enforced. When a merchant saw this emblem beside an entry for armor or nails, he knew he was buying more than a product. He was buying into a system of accountability. Medieval ledgers from the great cloth halls of Flanders show this symbol was paramount, especially for textiles. A hammer and anvil drawn next to a bolt of Ghent drapery meant the wool was fulled, dyed, and woven according to the guild's exacting specifications, and that the artisans were paid a fair wage. This verification of origin and ethics built immense trust with distant buyers who could purchase with confidence sight unseen. It functioned as the direct ancestor of modern fair trade certifications and rigorous industry standards, where a logo assures you of a product's quality and the ethical conditions of its creation. How much does knowing the origin and the maker's conditions influence which products you trust? This powerful focus on craftsmanship and collective standards provided a foundation of reliability, but commerce also thrived on the opposite end of the spectrum, on pure, unproven potential, a high-stakes world governed by the next symbol in the code. A Venetian merchant's most ambitious dream was not written in words, but drawn with a pair of dice beside an entry for pepper and cinnamon. This symbol was a clear admission that the entire venture was a calculated gamble, a high-stakes wager on a new sea route or an untested market where the potential for colossal profit was matched only by the risk of total loss. The dice allowed merchants to compartmentalize their daring, keeping these speculative entries visually separate from the stable, predictable trades in their ledgers. Maritime records from the great Italian trading houses show this symbol frequently appeared next to investments in exploratory voyages, where a captain might be funded to sail beyond known maps in search of mythical lands or faster passages to the Spice Islands of the East. For example, dice sketched beside a large sum of silver meant the money was a bet placed on a particular ship and its master, a gamble that would pay off 100-fold if he returned with a hull full of nutmeg, or vanish entirely if his vessel was lost to the uncharted ocean. This system was the medieval engine of economic expansion, a way to finance innovation and discovery without jeopardizing the merchant's entire commercial empire. It functioned with the same core logic as a modern venture capital firm investing in a risky tech startup, where the promise of a revolutionary breakthrough justifies the high probability that the investment may fail. How do you balance the lure of high rewards against the very real possibility of loss in your own financial decisions? This symbol for pure chance, however, could only function within a system that was utterly reliable, a perfect ledger where every mark was understood, a truth represented by the ultimate symbol that bound all the others together. The final symbol in the merchant's lexicon was the compass rose, a master key that unified all others. A Lisbon trader closing his ledger on a monumental deal did not need to list every individual code. He drew a single, intricate compass rose beside the entry, its points radiating out to signify the complex web of agreements governing the venture. This single mark told his partners that the transaction combined a futures contract for pepper, a foreign exchange deal with the tower symbol, and a full insurance policy marked by the shield. It was a complete summary, a visual index pointing to the trust, time, and risk woven into the agreement. Portuguese exploration records are filled with these elegant symbols, acting as a navigational chart for the deal itself, guiding heirs and accountants through the intricate terms long after the original merchant was gone. This practice was the medieval precursor to a modern executive dashboard or a summary icon in a financial report, where a single graphic consolidates complex data into an instantly understandable whole. How could one master symbol bring immediate clarity to your most complicated projects or financial plans? The compass rose represents the ultimate sophistication of this system, a silent testament to how 26 simple marks did not just record trade, they engineered the very trust that built our world. Those 26 symbols were a financial language that refused to die. They simply evolved, their core principles of trust and efficiency migrating from parchment to the digital screens that now govern our global economy. The anchor that once secured a shipment of wool is the direct ancestor of the collateral you pledge for a car loan. The hourglass that counted down a debt is the same logic behind the net 30 terms on a modern invoice. Even the speculative dice roll lives on in the high-stakes world of venture capital and cryptocurrency trading. Historian Niall Ferguson argues that these very innovations were the bedrock of capitalism itself because they standardized trust and dramatically lowered the cost of doing business across vast distances. This was a revolution in data compression, a way to communicate complex agreements with a single, secure mark long before the invention of the computer. The medieval merchant did not need a lengthy contract to convey a futures deal. He simply drew an arrow. He did not need to explain a joint venture. He sketched interlocked rings. This symbolic thinking is the lifeblood of our modern financial world. The scrolling ticker symbols on a stock exchange, the emojis sometimes used to seal a deal in a casual text, even the icons on your banking app, all descend from that same inventive spirit. They are all tools to convey maximum meaning with minimum friction. This legacy challenges us to look at our own communication. How could a single, universally understood symbol within your team or family replace a long email chain or a confusing set of instructions? The true power of these codes was not in their secrecy, but in their ability to build a global network of commerce on a foundation of mutual understanding, a lesson in clarity that remains profoundly relevant today. These 26 symbols were the building blocks of a commercial revolution that reshaped our world. They transformed fragile handshake deals into a sophisticated global network, proving that trust could be systematized and scaled. From the anchor that secured a shipment to the compass rose that summarized an entire venture. Each mark was a marvel of visual efficiency, turning complex agreements into something a merchant could understand in a single glance. This was a language that prioritized action and clarity above all else, allowing traders to navigate immense risks and seize fleeting opportunities across continents. The practices they pioneered remind us that the core pillars of successful trade, effective communication and unshakable trust, are truly timeless, whether the medium is a parchment ledger or a digital platform. As the historian Carlo Cipolla observed, the economy of the Middle Ages was not primitive, it was sophisticated in its own right. Its legacy challenges us to look at our own records, our own agreements, and ask how a symbolic shorthand could enhance clarity and build stronger bonds in our collaborations. If this journey into the secret language of merchants has captivated you, I invite you to subscribe for more deep dives into history's hidden gems. I would love to hear which symbol you found most fascinating, so please share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining me in uncovering the ancient codes that quietly rewrote the very rules of trade.